The Second World War didn't happen overnight. It was the result of a deadly poker game where every bluff, every miscalculation brought humanity closer to the abyss. This is the story of how it all began, when Hitler started playing and the Western democracies made their first fatal mistakes. In this episode, I'll explain step by step how a catastrophe like World War II came to be. The final 5 years leading to war were like a relentless poker game. The Western democracies, represented by Britain, the United States, and France, adopted an appeasing and conciliatory attitude toward the revisionist powers of Germany, Italy, and Japan. This indecisive stance only emboldened their adversaries. The cost of the tolerance credit that the Western Allies extended to the Nazis and Japanese militarists would be tens of millions of deaths between 1939 and 1945. Even more striking, unlike the Western democracies, Nazi Germany, Japan, and Italy possessed none of the economic, strategic, or political resources necessary to wage a world war. The Western Allies were unaware of this simple fact. While they lacked today's observation technologies like satellites, massive radars, and listening stations, anyone with pen and paper could have calculated that Germany lacked vital raw materials such as oil, rubber, aluminum, nickel, cobalt, and tungsten necessary to wage a world war. Pre-war Germany lacked the foreign exchange reserves to adequately procure these materials, and the German industrial base was woefully inadequate to win a war. The same thesis applies to Japan. The Nazis had seized power by skillfully exploiting the unrest created by the Great Depression and the situation the 1919 Treaty of Versailles had left Germany in domestic politics. Hitler and the Nazi regime would quickly begin establishing a new economic order in Germany. While Germany launched a massive infrastructure and construction program through a semi-Keynesian policy with high public deficits, industrial production would increasingly turn toward military-type production. The solution the Nazis found to the economic devastation and rising unemployment created by the Great Depression was short-term. For a major export-dependent economy like Germany to keep the economy alive through public investments and military spending, they would need to either cover massive public deficits with foreign debt or seize the assets of other nations. The Nazis would choose the second path. Hitler's poker game. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Germany's military potential was quite weak compared to France and Britain. The Treaty of Versailles had limited the German army to 100,000 soldiers. Germany's front door, the Rhineland, had been demilitarized, meaning that whenever the Allies desired, they could send their soldiers into this indefensible region and occupy the Ruhr Valley, Germany's largest industrial center. Moreover, Germany had no heavy weapons, aircraft, or large-tonnage capital ships. To the east, Czechoslovakia and Poland were France's allies. In the event of war, it was impossible for Germany to defend its borders. Hitler would change Germany's geostrategic situation by entering into a massive poker game. In 1933, in the first months of his rule, Hitler would make a statement inviting all major powers to disarm in order to preserve world peace. When Britain and France rejected this proposal, Germany would withdraw from all disarmament negotiations and the League of Nations. Hitler's concern wasn't disarmament. Knowing his proposal would be rejected, he was creating grounds in international public opinion for Germany to eliminate Versailles restrictions. As early as 1934, Hitler launched a secret military program telling German military leaders they needed to be ready for war by 1942. In January 1935, through a referendum, the Saarland, rich in coal deposits taken from Germany for 15 years by Versailles, was incorporated into Germany. The incorporation of the Saarland into Germany had provided a critical energy source for the German war industry.
Then, in March 1935, Germany would announce through an open declaration that it would not accept the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, that the German army would reach a force of 500,000 soldiers, 36 German divisions, and the German Air Force would be established. The British and French failed to act against this open challenge. This is the first major mistake of the Anglo-French bloc. The guarantors of Versailles quickly gathered in Stresa, a charming Italian town hosted by Mussolini, and issued a declaration against Nazi Germany. The declaration by the Italian, French, and British prime ministers represents the last time World War I victors stood together against Germany. Mussolini, contrary to popular belief, was still acting with the Western Allies as late as 1935. Indeed, after the Stresa Conference, Italian troops would quickly begin deploying at the Brenner Pass on the Austrian border. The aim was to prevent Hitler's next target, the annexation of Austria. Mussolini had calculated that after Hitler obtained Austria, he would covet South Tyrol, the German-speaking region annexed to Italy in 1919. The French had sensed what could happen to them. A treaty was signed with the Soviet Union, treated as a pariah in the international community, stipulating that if Nazi Germany attacked either party, the two sides would help each other. However, the agreement was quite vague, not fully outlining the nature and conditions of mutual assistance. This agreement would not turn into a coalition or alliance.
The second mistake is much heavier. The 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement, signed months after Stresa, fixed the size of the German Navy at 35% of British naval tonnage. The British had not consulted France and Italy, the other guarantors of the Treaty of Versailles, when signing this agreement. While the British goal was to prevent a naval race like that of 1905 to 1914, the British government had failed to understand Hitler and his objectives. Hitler, with a clever approach, knew very well that Germany's capabilities were too limited to enter a naval race with the British. With this agreement, Hitler had officially pierced Versailles for the first time with Britain's consent. Moreover, Stresa had gone to waste. Then Mussolini would begin invading Abyssinia in October 1935. Mussolini's aim was to increase his own popularity by avenging the disastrous defeat Italy had suffered in 1896 and to plunder Abyssinia's natural resources. With the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, the League of Nations had begun an embargo against Italy, but the Allies had ensured, both openly and secretly, that this embargo would not be effective. While the French wanted to keep the Italians in the Stresa coalition, the British had acted hesitantly in this initiative. But the British and French could neither enforce League of Nations rules, save Abyssinia, nor curb Germany. The British allowed the Italians free use of the Suez Canal, while the United States increased its exports to Italy. Moreover, all this occurred despite knowledge that the Italians were using chemical weapons against civilians in Abyssinia. After this incident, Hitler understood that the British and French would hesitate to use force against Nazi Germany, which wanted to change the Versailles and Locarno order. In the Abyssinia case, the Allies had made their third mistake by showing Hitler their hand. Hitler's next move would perhaps be the bluff of his life. In March 1936, he ordered the German army to enter the Rhineland, Germany's outer gate. The German chancellor would say this to propaganda minister Dr. Goebbels at that very moment. If the French intervene, I'll have to tuck my tail between my legs like a street dog and withdraw the troops. The soldiers entering the Rhineland were small-scale, non-motorized units. These units would return without fighting if a French counteraction was taken. However, French intervention would not come. This was the Allies' fourth mistake. After the Germans put their soldiers into the Rhineland, they would quickly establish the famous Siegfried Line to fortify the German-French border. The entry of German soldiers into the Rhineland meant the closing of Germany's front door, and the meaning was very clear. Germany was now ready to settle Versailles' account with Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Lithuania, which had seized German-speaking regions after World War I.
The militarization of the Rhineland by Germany had also affected our young republic, which had no connection to these events. Ataturk, who closely followed the events and grasped where things were heading, would solve the Straits issue, Turkey's weak spot, on this occasion. Understanding that British and French attention had turned to Germany and Ethiopia, Ataturk would peacefully secure the militarization of the Straits region and the transfer of control of the Straits to Turkey through the Montreux Convention of July 20, 1936. Full military control of the Straits was critical for Turkey. The unfortified Straits were similar to the demilitarized Rhineland. This fundamental problem had not been resolved at Lausanne. Although Turkey had won the War of Independence in 1922, it had not yet been able to get its soldiers into Thrace and Istanbul in the final phase of the war. The recovery of these regions without fighting the British had been possible by postponing the Straits problem. With Montreux, Turkey had acted in time, peacefully closing its own front door. The risk posed by the quite powerful and modern Italian navy in the Mediterranean and Italian Prime Minister Mussolini's aggressive attitude was very clear. As Montreux was being signed, civil war had broken out in Spain. The extreme right coalition of conservatives, phalangists, and monarchists had mobilized against the left and Republican coalition holding the central government. The Soviet Union supported the left wing, Italy and Germany the right wing. The right wing, led by General Franco, would win the 3-year civil war. Approximately 350,000 people would lose their lives in this bloody civil war. This civil war would bring Italy and Germany closer, and German and Italian weapons and tactics would be tested in this war. The Western Allies' failure to openly stand by the Spanish central government was the fifth major mistake. In 1939, France would witness the birth of a fascist Spain allied with Germany and Italy. By 1936, Hitler had successfully remilitarized the Rhineland, broken the Versailles Treaty piece by piece, and the Western powers had made 5 critical mistakes. But this was just the beginning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan was embarking on its own aggressive path. In the next episode, we'll explore Japan's militaristic transformation and Germany's final preparations for the inevitable war. The poker game was far from over.